Whatever
Okay,
you did was great.
I found a button. I found a button deep, deep, deep in the Zoom land. All right, Shannon, Shannon, if you don't mind trying to share your screen.
All right, here we go. Y'all ready? Take a deep breath.
Phew, all right, 4:47. Let's get started.
Yay. How's that?
Yes.
Yay.
Good.
Yay. Ah, okay. Well, Mercury is in retrograde, and all we can do is just take a deep breath, refresh, restart, redirect, and not react. So thank you, Todd, for just plowing on through. So anyway, so I'd like to introduce myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I fit into our lovely panel. And I have worked with the Coalition of Compassionate Care for about 6 years now as a trainer. And I've taught classes at Herrick. I've taught classes at DaVita Dialysis. I have taught with different programs and also through the Conversation Project through the Medical Association. St. Paul's Towers is an entry fee community, and I have worked in the senior housing, assisted living, specifically dementia care community at one point for this is my 21st year. And I have to say, I've also been on the side of holding space for someone while they have been passing. My uncle, who had no directives whatsoever, both of my parents, who they had advanced directives, but we never really talked about sort of that robust detail of dying. And both my parents had great stories about that. I've also been the sister to a brother that we took off life support a year ago, December, because in his advanced directive workbook, he was very specific about how he wanted to live, how he wanted to die. And as awful as it was, all we were doing was doing what he wanted us to do. And so with heavy hearts, we were able to do that for him. And my best friend had brain cancer for 3 years. In tandem with her husband, we helped her cross that finish line. So I've done it from a lot of different perspectives. And as Thalia will, I hope, echo, it's a powerful privilege to be with someone. So, regardless of what path we take, advanced care planning is essential, because if you have like a cancer, you're going to go along for a long time with treatment, surgeries, whatever, and then your body just can't tolerate it anymore. If you have like a heart issue, you're going to go in and out of the emergency room and doctor's visits, and your health is just going to decline, but you're going to have these periods of up and down. My mom had frequent flyer miles at Alta Bates Hospital, I have to say. And then there's chronic illnesses, Parkinson's, MS, dementia, where it's kind of a long haul, right? So really what I would like to talk to you about is really making some plans on how do you want your story to be. So what people say they want is that it's really important to talk with my family and tell them what my wishes are. But you know what? Only 30% of people have done so. 60% of the respondents to this survey said that they want to make sure that their family is not burdened by decisions for their care, but more than half of them have not said anything to their family. 82% of people said that it was very important or even somewhat important to put their wishes in writing, but 23% have done so. So basically, people have some inkling on how they would like their dying experience to be, but they're keeping it a secret. Yep.
It's probably a very common thing to procrastinate around, I must say, but
it is. So really what folks have said in the same survey were, what's important to me at the end of my life? Making sure my family isn't burdened by care, being comfortable and without pain, being at peace spiritually, making sure my family is not burdened by the tough decisions, having loved ones around me, being able to pay for the care that I need, making sure that my wishes for medical care are followed, not feeling alone, having practitioners who respect my cultural beliefs and values. In Bob's case, it was something that he, from a long, long, long time ago, Bob Moss knew exactly what he wanted. For some people, a very small percentage or a smaller percentage, it is living as long as possible, being at home and having a close relationship with practitioners. So the question for this talk is, how do you really take this list and turn it into something that's dignified? Because this is kind of a perfunctory list. Would you agree? So what does dying dignified mean to you? And how do you know that you're not putting everything on the list? So bear with me, but you might come back to this at some point and fill it in for yourselves. You know, a rather perfunctory start is your advanced care directive, right? Who's your healthcare agent? Do you want resuscitation? Do you want to try everything? Are there some procedures that you want or don't want? Do you want a trial of procedures? Signature and witnesses, yeah. But again, this is pretty perfunctory. It kind of just is a checklist, wouldn't you agree? The PULSE, which is a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, is a little bit more of an immediate type of document, but again, it's really fairly perfunctory. So here are some tools, and don't panic. I will go through these, and then you will have, Todd will be able to send you this in writing, so don't panic. But here's some tools to help you decide for yourself, what does your version of a dignified passing look like? And how do you actually have that conversation with others? Because remember, in the first survey, people knew what they wanted, but they didn't tell anybody. And as Todd pointed out, this is kind of a ooey gooey conversation, right? But we're all going to pass away at some point. We just don't know when and kind of how. So go wish, 5 wishes. Isn't that a nice thing? I wish for this. A conversation starter kit, how to crack that conversation open. And my new favorite is this consumer's toolkit for planning. My brother Steve did this, and I was like, I am adding this to my documents. I loved it so much. There are also addendums these days through the Coalition of Compassionate Care for COVID-19. Like, what if you don't want to be intubated, right? But you get COVID. Are you willing to do intubation because you have COVID? Because there are some good outcomes. Dementia, if you can no longer make a decision, hopefully you've had these conversations beforehand. Yeah. So the conversation starter kit is really how to open up that conversation. And it's a little workbook, lots of spaces to write. You can get it online. And again, don't worry, we will send you where to get them. But it's set up in ready, set, go. Get ready. What kind of things do you need to think about? Get set. How do you kind of figure out how you want to have that conversation? Who you want to have it with? In our family, we always had second dessert. You know, Thanksgiving dinner, you're all stuffed, you put everything away, wash up the dishes. Now we're watching a movie and someone's like, I think I could have a little. My mom, it was always stuffing. But, you know, usually when we kind of rounded that corner, then we were kind of settled in for some really wonderful conversations. So this is a really good guide. And sometimes you could just fill it out and give it to someone and say, I want to talk to you about this. And then it's kind of opened up for you. Another really fun one, who doesn't like to play a game of cards, right? This is actually a deck of 36 cards. And on each card is a statement about something about dying. Is it finances, spiritual? I want to have family. When I've done this talk at the South Berkeley Senior Center, oh, I don't want my family around me. They annoy me. I don't want them in the room. I don't want them in the state while I'm dying. They can come to my funeral. So very specific, right? But these cards, you put them out and then you sort them into really important, somewhat important, and I don't care about. move the I don't care pile. Now you start shuffling through the other cards and making a discernment, like what's the most important. As a facilitator, it's really fun because what you do is you say to people, take half the cards away. A little sweat starts to come up. You say, okay, now take away 5 more cards. A little bit more sweat start coming up. When people are needing to come down to like 5 cards total, remember you started out with 36, 4 cards total, 2 cards total sweat breaking out. It's really interesting because you really do pick and choose what's important to you. It's a great game to play with other people. And these are all very much around topics of dignity, topics of a good passing, not the perfunctory, I have my advanced care directive and this is my agent. And it really delves into that whole process and environment and feelings.
Probably a good icebreaker and conversation starter to have with the rest of your family.
Absolutely, because who doesn't want to play cards, right? Yeah. Five
Okay.
Wishes is a lovely booklet. And again, it's a booklet and you check, 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 right? They ask you questions and you check things. The sneaky part is in here, you end up with your advanced care directive because you're going to make a wish about who's going to make decisions for me. I wish this kind of medical treatment. I wish to be this kind of comfort. In my booklet, my term is, and I don't know what the medical amount is, but I am averse to pain. Actually, I'm a chicken blank, blank, blank. And so my term is zoop me up, even if it hastens my death. Don't want to be a pain, right? How I want people to treat me. That is a nugget of dignity. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. And also, what do I want my loved ones to know? I love you. You were my favorite brother. I can say that now because I'm not in the room, right? Yeah. So this is a lovely 5 Wishes booklet. And again, check, 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 check. Okay, you're all like, okay, where do I get these things? Glad you asked. So the Go Wish cards, and again, Todd can send this to you, so don't panic. You can, there's a free online game. You could just play it and play it and play it. You can actually purchase cards, card decks. They're not very expensive. 5 Wishes, it is copyrighted, and they ask for a $5 donation. You can get a packet of 25 for, I don't remember, but not a whole lot. They actually have versions for children and youth and adults, and 5 Wishes is a legal document. The Conversation Starter Kit and any of the tools that are through the Conversation Project, they are free and they are not copyrighted. They just want everybody to use them. My new favorite is the Consumer's Toolkit. It is through the American Bar Association. So of course they've copyrighted it, right? But it's free. So I think you just have to send them a couple bucks. What I like about this is that it asks you a question and then asks you some sub questions. In one of them, my brother Steve was like, what would you like done with your body? And he said, well, I would like to be cremated. And when our dad passed, my dad's ashes are a little bit at his college, a little bit at St. Mary's College in Moraga, a little bit at our house, Ballard Locks in Seattle. And when I was sprinkling them with my brother Steve up in Seattle, he looks at me and goes, Jan, don't do this to me. I want all my ashes in one place. When I come back, I am not missing a limb. He wrote that in this toolkit. Ashes buried all together, comma, I mean it, Jan. Okay, like I've just been called out, right? So these are really great resources for you to get documented and really fleshed out. What does death with dignity mean to you? There's some great books. We have a very active end of life committee at St. Paul's Towers, and they put together this lovely directory of books. There's a whole lot more. And then also organizations. So these all have stories and exercises and blogs and resources for you to dive in. And as Todd said, yeah, the hardest part is like kind of getting going and getting it finished. And I am very happy to be your nudge. And so if you want to do any of these and you want someone to kind of move you along, this is my contact email, and I am welcome to keep you moving along. Yeah. So
Great,
I am
Janet.
going, yeah, and I'm going
Nicely
to,
done.
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
That's great. A really good consolidated summary of resources. And yes, I'll get that from Janet and we'll make that available to all of you folks after the fact. We'll keep your eye on the chat window in case we paste any URLs or resource links in there. But without further ado, since we cheated ourselves up front, let's move on to the star of the show, Sue Moss. Sorry, Sue, that wasn't meant to be pressure, but this is the story we're keen to hear. So take yourself off mute if you don't mind. Can you do that?
I really do know my way around Zoom.
Yes, you do.
I
Good,
just
good for
don't know
you.
what happened.
You
You're
know what?
nailing it.
Mercury's in retrograde. So, you know, that just happens.
All right, carry on, Sue.
Well, first of all, I want to say hi to everybody. It's great to be able to be here and sharing what I've learned with everyone. I especially want to say hi to those people who I've known in classes over the last couple of years. It's a very friendly feeling to be here. And I must say that Bob would have loved seeing you all too. So before I start describing our journey, I want you all to know how happy and relieved Bob was on D-Day, which is what he called the day he took the Kool-Aid. How much I miss him. And I want you to know that I'm doing really well. I'm in our home for now, surrounded by family and friends, always masked and always outdoors still. I get my first vaccine on Friday, and I understand Janet got her second, along with everybody else at St. Paul's Towers, today. So congratulations on that. I continue to expand and revise my garden, cope with COVID, and I miss so much hugging my grandchildren. So this is our story. Bob and I lived a very adventureful life, which I think in a lot of ways helped prepare us for the most adventurous journey ever, navigating the end of life that Bob envisioned for himself. For those of you who knew Bob, you knew he rarely went anywhere without his blue and gold Michigan baseball cap. He was a Michigander born and bred. For instance, because he grew up in Detroit, he felt he had a birthright to know everything about cars. This really academic guy. And he just seemed to know everything about cars, so that must be true. The other important thing for my story about Michigan is that Michigan is where Dr. Jack Kevorkian lived and pressed for the right of doctors to be able to provide aid in dying to terminally ill patients during the 90s. To me, it seems like it must have been a lot longer ago than that, but it really was in the 90s. His advocacy of assisted suicide helped spur the growth of hospice care in the United States and made many doctors more sympathetic to those in severe pain and more willing to prescribe medication to relieve it. If you've had relatives in and out of the medical system in the last, say 30 years, there has been a sea change in how pain and care for the dying has changed dramatically, thanks to that wonderful man. In the early aughts, Oregon and then Washington had public debates, which we were aware of in living in Seattle, as we were at that time. They both passed bills to allow physicians to administer aid in dying drugs to terminal patients. In 2006, the United States Supreme Court, which I think we often lose sight of, upheld a lower court ruling that found that Oregon's Death with Dignity Act protected assisted suicide as a right. In 2013, we moved to California from Seattle. In 2016, California was trying, not for the first time, to pass its first death with dignity.
5 times.
Pardon?
It took them 5 times.
Took them 5. Okay. We, in the Northwest, we always look to California for the state of the law because they always seem to be the first to pass liberal and progressive legislation that's helped move our society forward over the years. Anyway, in 2013, we moved here, and jump ahead to 2016. Once California is once again trying to pass a death with dignity law. That summer, Bob went to Sacramento to lobby for the bill. And that year, California finally manages to pass its own death with dignity bill, allowing physicians to prescribe life-ending medications to folks who are suffering. The California law is more strict than Oregon's, and that's why you hear of people moving to Oregon to seek out aid in dying. And usually, not people exactly on their deathbed. If you have a wasting disease like PD or
Alzheimer's,
Alzheimer's,
ALS.
cancers.
ALS, etc. You don't know exactly when you're 6 months from death. You know, it's really hard for your physician to, with a straight face, tell somebody that they are truly within 6 months of dying. In 2017, Bob confirmed with me how he would like to die. He asks if I will help him when the time comes, and I said, of course. Little realizing at that point just how much I would have to steer the ship to get him to his destination. It was only somewhat traumatic for me to agree to what Bob wanted because I had some experience around the deaths of my parents, negative experiences, I must say. When my father was dying from lung cancer in early 1990, before all of these changes, and I was visiting from Seattle, he asked me if I knew how he could end his life. I felt awful that I wasn't equipped to help him. My mother was an RN, and I knew she would not help him without proper sanctions. In the end, he died an agonizing death, which I unfortunately was there to witness. 8 years later, when my mother was already on hospice with late-stage melanoma and telling me how ready she was to leave this world, she came down with severe pneumonia and ended up in the hospital, which was not the plan. When you are in a hospice, part of the agreement is that you are getting palliative care only. There will not be great life-saving measures like going to the hospital that will be taken. But there were circumstances that her hospice nurse wasn't available that day. And her doctor said, just take her to the hospital or have 911 come and take her to the hospital. Long story short, she was given enough morphine to put her in a coma. The doctor, who in hearing her story and of her wish to die going back 2 years, recommended sending her home in the coma. It took a week for her to die. My sisters and I caring for her day and night. It was really hard. So when Bob asked me to help, I was ready. The stage was set. However, we knew nothing about how to get started, not a clue. Had none of Janet's wonderful materials available. So in 2018, one of my strategies was to join PD Active. I suggested this to Bob in part to find resources that the group might have in place for end-of-life discussions and issues. But they seemed to be just totally absent. Nobody seemed to be wanting to talk about this. Even the advanced PD caregiver support group wasn't talking about it, and no one seemed to be asking the question I needed answered to. So what next? Well, being a modern girl, I turned to Google to see what I could find out. The first thing, I sat in front of the computer, not knowing what to do, what to start. It was an emotional subject. And the first thing that came to my mind was to look up the Hemlock Society. Now, that tells you I'm an old girl too. But honestly, I was kind of just emotionally frozen at that point. So what I found out was that times were changing and the Hemlock Society was out of business. And but I don't know, I forget the date, but I'm sure it was after the death with dignity laws were passed. Next, just poking around, I found info on the Compassion and Choices group that provides information on how to end your suffering by stopping eating and drinking. Well, I'd gone through that with my mother. That was not very acceptable, and Bob wasn't interested. It takes a lot of discipline and a rock solid team that will hold a vigil for up to a week while bodily processes slow down and end. One of its selling points is that it's free of cost, which normally would have appealed to Bob, who liked to get a deal wherever he could. But he didn't like the idea because he didn't want to put that burden of overseeing the week-long process on me or the kids. So back to Google. This time I looked up what I wanted by the name of the bill that passed in the state. And that led me to the one website listing a group offering physicians aid in dying called Bay Area End of Life Options. Don't remember that because that's not valid any longer. The practice of Delani Shavelson and Thalia, our Thalia here, DeWolf. Both former hospice personnel, both realizing that there were kinder, gentler ways to end one's life. Excuse me. I read their material and felt I was finally getting somewhere. Bob agreed, so I filled out the paperwork and asked for a callback. We then had an in-home visit by Thalia. She explained that according to the law, the California law, Bob would need 2 doctors to certify his eligibility, that he was within 6 months of dying, and urged us to begin preparing by asking his neurologist or whichever doctor he was closest to if they would be the primary doc. That means the prescribing doc who would oversee the whole process. She, where am I? He said no, but he said that he would be the second. So with that in our pocket, we felt more confident about going ahead. She also explained that state law required that Bob would have to be within 6 months. Okay, ouch. As you know, as with all wasting diseases, no one can know when that will be. Thalia explained that the way that this could be established was if he qualified for hospice, which requires that people they serve must have a diagnosis of only 6 months left to live. Excuse me. Disappointed but determined, we began the wait, which turned out to be another agonizingly long 2 years. Still, we were glad to have registered with a practice that would be there when the time came. 2 years later, Bob's advanced PD symptoms, one of which was dementia by now, were so much worse. I was concerned that soon he might not have capacity he would need to attest to what he was going to do and what the end result would be. which was another requirement of the law. I contacted Thalia again, and she walked me through getting accepted by hospice. Here I should say that the fee for assistance through Bay Area end-of-life options was $3,000, not free, but it is excellent service. And the $3,000 are split into 2 payments. And then there was another $700 charge for the medicines. I found out that both Sutter Hospice and Kaiser have teams that are experienced in physician's aid in dying if you ask for them, know to ask for them. When there's no fee for their services, but the way the law is written, they're not permitted to be in the room when the medicines are mixed and administered. This is an important point because there are 2 meds that must be mixed, then given shortly, 15 minutes apart. And the patient has to be able to drink the meds by theirself. That means the caregiver or other support persons must leave the room to mix the meds. In our case, during COVID, just 2 people were allowed to be present. And in fact, it was just me holding Bob's hand while Thalia mixed the meds. Now, Bob would not have wanted to have a party of all his best friends in the first place. But so that wasn't a problem for us. I was so thankful I didn't have to leave his side. That's the whole point. I got to be with him, hold his hand, talk to him, joke with him. So back to hospice. We tried once with Sutter Hospice, and Bob, the fellow they sent us was a sailor, so was Bob, and they exchanged sea stories, big fish stories, and we're having a good old time. Bob was in prime form, beyond prime form, and the fellow rejected him because he was doing too well. So a month later, it was clear that a window was closing for Bob, or a door. And that if we didn't get on with things, he was not going to have the capacity any longer to say what he wanted and what the result was going to be. When we tried the second time, I was better organized. I actually had a list of the 20 items or so that were all of his symptoms. And on Thalia's advice, I emphasized his changing ability to swallow and his fall history. He'd begun to fall every couple of weeks. So that gave the person who was evaluating a better picture of where Bob was. She was not a sailor. And so, he just was more himself. And they did accept him. Once you're accepted by them, the hospice doctor will act as the first prescribing physician or the second confirming physician, who also needs to certify that you are very probably within 6 months of natural death. This is the only flexibility in the dictates of the law that people with Parkinson's can take advantage of to accelerate things somewhat. Lastly, the law requires 2 interviews, 15 days apart, to make sure the patient wants to move forward and meets the criteria. After the first interview, the prescribing doc submits the prescription, which you receive some 5 days later and put away until D-Day. It can stay on the shelf for as long as it takes for you to feel ready to go ahead. Since we knew Dr. Shabelson was planning to retire at about the end of our 15 days, and since Bob was so ready to go, we arranged to have the second interview exactly 15 days after the first. On D-Day, now that's Bob's term, not mine, Bob had a Zoom meeting with Dr. Shabelson to ascertain if he could still qualify. Bob passed the test with flying colors and enthusiasm. Again, he was very ready to take this step. Thalia mixed the drugs, which Bob was very eager to take so he could be on his last big adventure. Thalia attached a heart monitor and an oximeter to measure the slowing of his heart and oxygen. 39 minutes later, he was gone. After Bob climbed into bed, Thalia narrated and he took the medicine. Thalia narrated for me how things were going to happen after he took the meds, which really helped me stay grounded. A veteran of some 300 assists, she let me know when he might belch or partially sit up, or that his heart might speed up for a bit along the way, and so forth. When his heart finally stopped, I went outside to get some air. And I literally felt the burden and stress rise off my shoulders, just as Bob would have wanted. Thank you.
Sue, thank you very much. Your courage is incredible and very beautiful. And we appreciate you being here and sharing your story with us. So I get a little verklempt. Thanks.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and later I'm happy to answer questions.
That's nice. That's great. Well, feel free to take a few breaths. You can put yourself on mute if you like, but let's now introduce Thalia, whom you referenced several times. Thalia, rude though it might be, we have to distill as much as we can your role and your relationships with clients like Sue and Bob into a few minutes, if you would, so we can get to questions and answers. I don't want to cheat the important role that you play. So definitely go through what you need to go through. But if there are windows where we can accelerate to Q&A, that would be great. And you're on mute. Let me see if I can unmute you.
I got unmute.
There you go.
I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I just want to say to Sue and to Bob and to everybody that no matter how well we plan and no matter how good it is, death is always sad. It's a sad thing. When I drive anywhere near where Sue is, I can feel Bob and I feel a little sad. Like, I do miss my people after they've gone. It was such an honor and a pleasure to work with Sue and Bob through the time. And anyway, what I also want to say is that a couple of things. I, as the nurse for Bay Area End of Life Options, and now the nurse for the American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid in Dying, I do not advocate medical aid in dying. That's not what I advocate. I advocate attentive care of patients who are interested in medical aid in dying. And that is really what I hoped I provided for Sue and for Bob, is the container where, because he was wondering if, he really wanted medical aid in dying, and I was there to kind of help if I can. I just want to say something to consider when you're making these plans. Have good plan A, good plan B, and a secret good plan C, because we all know the best laid plans can go awry. So I think the discussions need to be ongoing. So in Bob's case, one of the things that we were worried about, and this is true of Parkinson's patients, is first of all, in order to legally qualify for medical aid in dying, you do have to have a terminal diagnosis, which means you have to have a less than 6-month prognosis. And for Parkinson's and a lot of neurological diseases, that's a little hard to nail down, but not impossible. So I had Sue keep track of some essential ingredients. What the doctors are looking for is 2 points on a graph that indicate a decline. They're not looking to be absolutely definitively sure. They just need to be basically sure. Now, when it comes to hospice care, we highly advocate hospice care. It is not perfect. Sue will tell you hospice care leans a lot on families and bedside care. They don't do that piece, but they will provide a lot of safety net. That's really what hospice care is about, I'd say. And I think for Parkinson's patients, particularly who are interested in medical aid in dying, getting into hospice care means it will be just that much easier to be legally eligible for medical aid in dying. I think what I want to say mostly is that if patients or family members or loved ones or people are interested in medical aid in dying, It takes a long time to put it together. It's good to start talking about it now. Lots of doctors will say, yeah, I support it. But you need to know when push comes to shove, will they write the prescription? Will they act as the attending prescriber? There are almost no hospice doctors who will act as the attending prescribing doctor, but they will act as the consulting, which is confirming physician. And I think the other thing I want to tell you is, though our practice has closed, the American Clinicians Academy is going to have a way to refer patients, not only for doctors that participate, but also for bedside attendants who can be like the Thalia substitute. They won't be me. Often they won't be nurses, but they can be doulas. They can be volunteers. These are all things that are possible. So I know we probably have a lot of questions. I welcome them. Did I cover the basics of, I want to say the other thing, I've been a hospice nurse for almost 10 years. So I'm really a strong advocate for good, attentive, palliative care, however people die.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
good wrap up. That's great, Thalia. And if folks have more questions about Thalia's role, I mean, the floor is now open to questions on any of the topics. So you now know the roles of our panelists, some of their experiences, and some of the resources that Janet had to offer. If you have any questions to any of them,
We have one.
Aside. I
Hang
just
on
wanted
second,
one
Taylor.
little aside. I wanted to say that since the law passed, I'm not here to morally debate medical aid and dying. The law passed. I'm a nurse. I'm here representing nurses who want to provide this kind of attentive care. And I think, much as I bow to final exit, I think now that medical aid and dying is legal and can be, what I say is we've drawn people out of darkened bedrooms into the light where we can help take care of them. I don't advocate for anything that isn't really attentively managed with people who know what the hell they're doing, because I am here to tell you aid and dying can be done badly.
Yeah, good.
As far as
So-
questions, we actually have one that's been in the chat room for a while from Carol R.
Yeah.
Wondering, doesn't one need permission from local authorities to scatter ashes? And I'll leave it to our panelists to decide who will answer.
Well, I will
Jan,
answer
you-
for our
right.
family since I
Yeah.
threw it out there. Yes, you probably do. My brother his ashes are in the front yard of their house under a tree in a biodegradable urn, and his wife just put him there. So yes, you probably should, but with my dad, we did a little here, a little here, a little here. And so maybe it's do as I say, not as I did.
Fair enough. If anybody else, and by the way,
For my
please,
understanding,
please feel free to unmute yourselves if you have questions. And also, if you're planning on raising your hand to show us that you have a question, then you'll need to start your video. So if you've got your stock name or image up there, then go ahead. Sue, you had a response?
Yes. So we did not have any kind of, funerals weren't, and commemorative services weren't happening during
Yeah.
the time when Bob died. So we waited a while, partly because it took them weeks to get him actually cremated. They had a line-up at the mortuary. But we went to the Neptune Society because, being a sailor, and Bob didn't have a preference, but I felt that he should be buried at sea since we'd spent so many years on the water.
And do you recall any permissions you had to get?
Yes. We had to have the crematorium, the mortuary, do the paperwork for us. That gave us permission to bury him in San Francisco Bay, or scatter him.
Mhm.
And the boat that the Neptune Society has is expecting that paperwork. And so we had to tell the mortuary how many people were going to be on the boat.
Mhm.
So for a 40 passenger boat, there were 7 of us. Very safe. And they, the paperwork was all, it was all taken care of
Mhm.
for us.
So
We just
that
had to get the paperwork from the
might be
mortuary.
the case then for any place you wish to spread ashes. You need to work through the moratorium, the mausoleum, and the cremator, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, I think, yes.
Okay.
I don't know if there's another way. Time
Any
to
other
do it,
questions
though.
out
I
there?
don't know.
Questions? Marjan, take yourself off mute if you would, or I can try to do that for you. There you go.
Okay, yes, I was wondering what stage of Parkinson is good to start actually preparing for that?
So I think that Parkinson's does have some stages that are talked about and that are qualified by various scales. But what I would say that primarily so here's my suggestion. As a Parkinson's patient, if you're interested in aid in dying, one of the most important things you can do, and I told Sue this, is to try to get into hospice care, because that's also a safety net. It means that if aid in dying becomes impossible, you're still cared for. So what does it take to get into hospice care? Here are a few secret cues. One is significant weight loss, more than 10% of your body weight within 3 months. A history of frequent falls. I hate to say it, but they want to know that. And then just increasing need for assistance. So, it's hard for me to exactly nail down. I will tell you this, very important. Some neurologists will not tell you that you're terminal from Parkinson's disease until you're basically at death's door, and that's too late. This process has to get started. It takes no less than 2 weeks, and more likely, if you're a Parkinson's patient, in order to become legally eligible, there's going to be some discussion. It's going to be complex. So I would say it's not too soon to begin to make it clear to your providers that when you become terminally ill, you'll be interested in medical aid in dying and you want support. So I think that saying that very early, but again, it's about weight loss, increasing need for assistance with ADLs, and having 2 points on the graph that show a significant decline. Does that answer for people?
Sort of.
And Thalia, take a minute since you were walking down that path anyway, let's segue into a little bit of the concept of capacity.
Okay, so one of the risks, and this is true for Parkinson's especially, in order to have capacity for medical aid in dying, capacity means you have the capacity to make medical decisions for yourself. And that there's a very specific frame that means. That means you understand the nature and consequence of your medical decisions. You're able to weigh the benefits and the risks, and you're able to express, to communicate those thoughts to a provider. And you have to have that capacity when you make your first verbal request, when you make your second verbal request, and in the moments before you take aid in dying.
Yeah.
So for Parkinson's patients, not everyone will have capacity. In other words, what can happen is you become terminal, and as you become more terminal, your capacity falls away, and then you will no longer be eligible for medical aid in dying.
And such capacity will be measured by the physician.
It's typically measured by a physician, but it can be alerted by a hospice nurse. Mm-hmm. However, I will tell you this, important about capacity, some nurses get this wrong. You can be depressed. Most of my patients have some bout of depression when they're in the process of shifting gears and becoming terminal. It's sad. So depression does not rule you out for being eligible for medical aid in dying unless you are totally incapacitated by it. Meaning I've had one patient whose depression was so severe, she couldn't make the decision about what socks to wear or what room to sit in. She couldn't answer questions. So at that point, her depression was so severe, she had been eligible for medical aid and dying. She lost that eligibility. We treated her for the depression. The depression lifted. She regained her capacity. So capacity can come and go, and it typically does in terminally ill patients. I've seen cancer patients who one day are talking and then the next day they slip into a minimally responsive state. And then a few days later, they may pop back out after they've had some medications to decrease brain swelling, for instance. So
Janet, did you
capacity.
want to chime in?
Yeah, so as with Bob, this conversation was very open and candid between them. And Sue, was it also a candid conversation with your children?
Yes, that's an important point. I felt it was really necessary from the time Bob sat me down and said, that's what I want to do, to keep them in the loop. So I let them know about the progression of his symptoms, knowing where we were headed. I wanted them on the team.
Yeah.
And they're both great people, and they were not happy with what they were hearing, but my daughter lives in town and she saw what was happening. My son is up in the Seattle area, and was glad to be kept in the loop. So there were no surprises.
Yeah.
We like to say that families don't keep good secrets. So patients who are interested in medical aid and dying, commonly when we ran our private practice, we would kind of try to lure people to kind of be truth a little more. And I am often the truth teller for families, and I don't mind, I'll take the heat. And then gradually people come to see that this is about autonomy. It's about patients getting their final wishes. We've had patients actually who were homeless and who found a friend who gave this man his final wish, which was to be able to die, taking medical aid and dying in the comfort with a few of his friends around him. That worked out quite nicely. So it's really about autonomy, and it's complex. On some level, it's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility.
Yeah. Janet,
and I think that the tools and the pieces that are out there to help you educate your family, but also to help you discern what is important to you. For some people, medical aid and dying might not be their choice. For some people, it is definitely their choice. For some people, they can stop eating. And for some people, it's very uncomfortable. But so by you using some of those tools to figure out what is important to you, and then sharing it so that, before you get to the stage, like Thalia and Sue were saying, before you get to the stage where you can't have that conversation, it just wants to be a common conversation. It's not hidden away. And don't you think also, Thalia and Sue, that, if at the very first, that doing a lot of research and reading, because now there is a lot of information, there are a lot of blogs, there are a lot of sharing of experiences, and I think that is a good way, as a good starting position, right? Just to get a lot of information.
I think there is a little bit of a risk there, much as I love it. I mean, I would say, of course, I'm going to tout the American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid and Dying, their website, because I helped put it together. There is always the risk that there is some misinformation that sometimes gets broadly, when it gets repeated through the media. So I think there was this idea that medical aid and dying was easy. It was like falling off a log, and actually it's complex. I'm really glad that I got to be there for Sue. And one of my biggest worries when we closed our practice is that we would orphan these patients who would be taking aid and dying kind of on their own. Yeah. I really recommend you have an experienced professional, a hospice nurse, someone, a doula, because that just makes it much more peaceful. It makes it so that we hold the container so that families can be families. Sweethearts can be sweethearts, friends can be friends, and there isn't somebody holding on to this complicated medical piece. Yeah. And I also think that actually, surprisingly, it has been hard to find providers who were willing to step up, which is why we started our practice. We started our practice thinking it was only going to be around for 2 years while California on-ramped. We were going to do trainings and a bunch of stuff, and it took us 4 years. And so now we've closed the practice and we've opened the American Clinicians Academy. And there's more and more. We've placed 147 patients with attending prescribing doctors since the academy started last August. I think
Wow.
close to one of our last people. So yeah.
Good
I
idea.
would also just like to put put the thought out there that assisted living communities, skilled nursing, continuing care such as St. Paul's Towers, the ones that I know of and have had experience with are very open to obviously hospice, but we have had folks at St. Paul's Tower use the medical aid in dying. So
I was
if
there.
you were, oh my gosh, wow. Okay, so my office is on the 5th floor, but you can't come in right now. So I would say that if you are at the stage where your family member might need to be in a community because of that extra support and that extra care, that should be one of the questions you just asked, because they will say, yeah.
It's a very important question. And actually, medical aid in dying basically cannot be done in any hospital setting. And most skilled nursing facilities do not allow it. Most memory care units do not allow it. Assisted living can, but you kind of have to ask them. And that's always tricky, though necessary.
I don't think it's a tricky question, just because I'm from the Midwest. We're just blatantly honest. So
Let me be blatantly honest and interject here for a second, just to give a time check. We're
good.
15 minutes away from our scheduled shutdown of this session. I would be happy if our panelists would be to go a few minutes over, since we had some little technical difficulties up front. So anybody that would like to linger past the 6 o'clock hour, hang in there if you would. If you still have questions. Now, I don't mean to shut down the flow of conversation here with the panelists, but if folks have questions, please do throw those into the chat window or raise your hand. I see Marjan learned how to use her little hand raising feature. Do you have another question, Marjan, or is that it?
Yeah, I was wondering, can you decide, can you make a decision while you have the capacity for this to happen at the later stage when you do not have the capacity?
Sadly, that's a very good question. So basically, you must have capacity when you make your first verbal request, but you also must have capacity in the moment before you take medical aid in dying.
Oh.
So if you've lost capacity, and it does happen, Sue will tell you, when I came to the house on his D-Day, there is a final attestation that he needed to sign. It's quite beautiful. I have a lot of last signatures, but the final attestation basically says that you understand what your disease is, that you know what your options are, and that you're choosing medical aid in dying, and then you sign your name and date it. So that you cannot take aid in dying if you don't have capacity. That isn't.
So Marjan, there are 3 points in the process where you need to have an attestation with a physician to determine that you still have the capacity to make this kind of heavy decision. And the last one is, as Thalia just said, on the day
Right
of.
then.
Oddly, that capacity evaluation, though, I mean, it's a weird part of the law. Remember that the law was written by lobbyists, not by medical professionals. So that 15-day waiting period for many, many patients becomes a huge burden. People think they can have aid in dying at the moment that they're dying, and that turns out not to be true. So what I like people to think about is that you can become eligible for aid in dying, and that eligibility never goes away. It just is there. So then you have the ability to have aid in dying if you've got capacity. But if you're not eligible, you literally do not have access to it. Yeah. So I've had patients who give a first verbal request and then die in the 15-day waiting period, often nicely with hospice, but still the families come back to me and say, we feel so bad because this is not what our dad wanted. He wanted aid in dying, and we just didn't know. It can be a struggle to find providers and to make this all come forward. So my suggestion is talk to your providers. Don't hesitate to send us a question at the acamade@gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat, is a place to send emails with questions, but also acamade.org. We have this big website. It's a little bit wordy, but there is a lot of good information, and there's videos on there that we put together.
Perfect.
Thank you.
acamade.org, everyone. That's also in the chat for your reference.
And that's MAID.
Mhm. Medical aid in dying. We do not call it, we don't use the term suicide at all, not even physicians use
No.
suicide, because it's not really suicide. Suicide is choosing between living and dying. Patients who are eligible for medical aid in dying are choosing between dying or dying or dying. They're choosing their mechanism of death.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
Any other questions, folks?
yeah, I've been with many patients, probably a couple of hundred patients now, and a few with Parkinson's for sure. I think the neurological diseases are more complicated to prognosticate, but I have to say, even, and there's some debate, there's still some moral debate about this, but often we say that even disabled people at some point will die. All of us will die.
Yeah.
And so at some point, for even disabled people to have access, I think is it's important. So I'm happy to help, work on this. But again, the American Clinicians Academy, it's interesting. We had a conference last February. It was a huge project. Here's the deal. The conference was for clinicians, not for ethicists, not for policymakers. It wasn't for debating. It was about how to provide this care well. People like to think of it as just, you just take your kill pill and you're done. And it's really not that simple.
No.
So, all of the care that leads up, like once a patient's eligible, I monitor patients very carefully to be sure they have a functioning GI tract. If a patient's beginning to lose their ability to swallow, I give them informed consent. I let them know you're losing your capacity to swallow. I'm concerned. I just want to let you know that if you want medical aid in dying, you're going to have to swallow 4 ounces of some nasty tasting medicines, right, Sue?
Yeah, exactly.
It's yucky. They're bitter. And if you have difficulty swallowing, it can be harder to do. So I think a lot of it.
You're like a guide down the path. You're helping them
Yeah.
various milestones.
I think it's all about informed consent and letting people know. And I think the other thing is that typically in hospice, we have a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy. So if you don't ask about medical aid in dying, we won't tell you. And so what does that breed? Shame. Typically it breeds shame. Patients kind of who secretly want this aren't really talking about it. I've had a few patients who were like, well, you'll help me out at the end, right? Won't you? And I'm like, and the nurse was like, yeah, we won't let you suffer. Well, it turns out the patient really wanted aid in dying. So at the very end, he's screaming like, how can you let me suffer? You told me you'd help me, right? So I would say part of this is to be as clear as you reasonably can. You don't have to know. I think the other thing is that if you think you might want this as a possibility, we're only talking about eligibility. You put that kill pill, what I tell people is we try not to deliver the medications until the week before the patient's going to take them, because then you kind of have to call and be sure that it's really for real, right? But once you're eligible, those medications can be waiting in the pharmacy for you if you need them. If not, who knows? You might have a very dignified death with hospice where you just decline and people can take good care of you. That is not impossible. Yeah. So medical aid in dying doesn't have a corner on dignity by any means. And I think that a good hospice death can be wonderful. It's hard to orchestrate, but it's not impossible. I think having someone at your bedside who can advocate well, it's not like you have to squeeze the hospice for every ounce. You just want to get good steering, right? And I think that is fairly complex. So, I mean, I have lots of stories up my sleeve. My very last patient that I just recently helped was a man who was absolutely, he had two kinds of cancers, and he did not want to do what the doctors wanted him to do. He did not want a big nephrostomy tube in his body to take the urine out. He had both bladder cancer and prostate cancer, and he was just bound and determined, and he lived alone. And I heard about him. His doctor put me in touch with him, and he kept saying, I'm just going to do this by myself. I can take care of it. And I was like, no, you really can't. We come into the world, we need help coming in, people catch us, and we need help going out. We need people to kind of care for us on the way out. It actually kind of takes a couple of hands. I had a lot of really intense talks with him because he was like so sure he could do this completely on his own because he was really smart and he was an engineer. And, I even had hospice nurses or nurses who did medical aid and dying with their parents call 911 because there was something that they didn't understand. There was, some agonal breathing and they were frightened. And it turned out that actually things were okay. Mom was completely anesthetized. She was dying as predicted after taking aid and dying. So I'm saying it is a process, So this last man, finally, I was able to kind of tell him, look, this is all about me making sure that this is safe for you and that you're comfortable. I would love to come and give you just that final little bit of care that that you're safe. He was like, I'm going to put the key in the mailbox and send it off to my sister, and then they'll know that I'm dead. And somehow it was going to be like a movie, right? It was still like a movie. It was very sweet. So I did go to his house and mix the medications, and I helped him, and I held his hand, and it was
right. At the very least, it makes it less lonely and less confusing.
Yeah.
Right?
honor. And he did actually want his hand held. And he told me lovely stories, and he told me his little minor regrets and the loves in his life. And I held his hand, and he wanted really to have his remains in the house for 2 hours so his soul could gently leave. And I was honored to give that to him. He gave me a plant that I think is in here. That plant. Oh wait, you guys can't see it. Let's see.
No.
Which he had been watering.
Aw.
I water it every Friday, as he did. Anyway, I'm just here, and we know I'm no longer the nurse that takes in patients, but I say, if you get an experienced doula or somebody who, or if you find somebody who wants to be a bedside attendant who has had experience, please put them in touch with me. I'm happy to do training. I just finished a set of 3 videos that trains people how to take care of a patient who's interested in medical aid and dying. And they were fun to put together. They're not drill and kill. They have like graphics, and Lonnie and we have a green screen. They're cool. They're pretty easy to do. And we even have a mock aid and dying, which is 8 minutes long. It's actors and me, and the medications are all fake. And it makes people feel like they kind of know a little bit more. It's like uncovering the veil a little bit, taking out the mystery.
Mhm.
Thalia, are those videos available for
Yeah,
public
free.
viewing?
Yeah.
Yes. To go to our website, go to the patient place. If you get stuck at all, email me and I'll send you the proper link. But the website is like for clinicians and patients, and the videos are free. You can have access to them. We also have our entire conference in sections in video, and some of the sections are quite wonderful. We talked about so many different things.
And that's
What's your email?
The
AC,
email,
it's in the chat thread.
Oh, okay.
yeah, hcamade@gmail.com.
Oh, I
It's in the
see.
chat.
Okay. Thank you.
If you forget, just think the American clinicians on what? Medical aid and dying. Because that's what it is. Medical aid for the dying.
Janet, anything from your side?
No, I find this fascinating. I just really encourage folks to, educate yourself from reliable resources. Might as well start with the ACA MAID. And if you have any sort of preferences, you need to let your family, if you are a solo ager and you don't have family, or you're estranged from your family, you've got to have someone who is your power of attorney to help and to be there. And I think I thank the baby boomers who every single stage have just looked at whatever was happening and said, we're going to bring video cameras into the birthing room. We're going to go out on the way we want. This is what we're going to do. And I just think that I love that we're tackling this last great chapter, here. And who knows what's beyond.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it's true.
Yeah.
It's a real honor and a pleasure to be in this chapter. And I also want to say, there is a contingent of people I'm going to call gawkers. Be careful of those. I mean, what I want to say is that I came into this partly because I lost a friend who was a doctor and he gave me a stethoscope, and I fell into taking care of people who were dying, not intentionally. But I'm here to say I am of service. The people who are going to help you, ideally, that's their role. They have something that they are containing for you. And everybody has a different sense about what's important in that endeavor.
Any other questions, folks?
Thank you.
Yeah, Todd has my email. If you need help getting any of these resources, please. Again, I love being of service, and I love my seniors, and so truly, if there's anything I can help, get you in touch with, please let me know. Yeah,
That's great. Well, you both are clearly folks that thrive on and deliver beautiful service in a tough chapter. So thank you both for being here. And Sue, once again, thank you for your courage, and thank you for sharing your story with us all.
Oh, we've got one question down here, Mutia.
I'm
Good.
sorry.
Oh,
I
good.
didn't hear how we get a copy of this so we can play it for our loved
Good.
ones, et cetera.
Good question. Tomorrow I will try to wrestle with paring it down from all of our technical difficulties and have it in a good tidy package of a video file that we will post on our YouTube channel, Mudita.
Oh,
And
you
so let's see if I can quickly paste that into the chat room. But in a moment when we sever this call, the chat will disappear anyway. So we'll make sure that we share that, Mudita, and everyone else in our communications that go out. So everyone that registered for this, and therefore that includes all of you, I will send a follow-up email to all of you with these key links in it. And if Janet, you can get me the copy of that short deck you ran up front.
Yeah, send it to you
include
right
that.
now. Yeah.
And
Sue's got her hand up.
I'll include the link to the YouTube channel, Mudita. So you'll be getting that in the next day or two. Yeah,
Sue Moss has a question.
go Sue.
So I wanted to let everybody know that I am available via email to answer questions. I think Delia and Janet have more technical information, but if there's anything that you might need my input for, I'm available.
That's nice.
So nice,
Appreciate
so
it.
good.
Yeah.
That's like the key. I think people who have been through this have a lot of wisdom, and Sue shares that so beautifully.
Yeah.
Especially if you get to go sit in her garden with her. Oh my
I
Lord.
know, right? Oh.
All
Sue
right,
just
well,
been
that's a good-
busted as a great
She
hostess.
has every one of my favorite plants, every single one.
All right, maybe we'll have our next session from Sue's backyard.
Ooh, there we go.
All right, that's a nice light note to end it on, folks. Thank you for spending part of your evening with us here. We hope you have a nice rest of your week. And thank you once more to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you,
This was really great.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Hi, Lynn.